All right, here we are for part 2 of our book, Forest Folklore. We are near a public park, so there will be some background noise of people, perhaps, vehicles, city noises. However, this is a beautiful spot, and I have walking off the beaten trail just enough that we shouldn't have any actual human visitors while we enjoy this book. So let me just situate this camera in a nice spot. There we go. And let's get started on chapter 2, and we'll see how it goes. All right. Chapter 2 is Fabulous Forests, Forests of Romance and Myth. The romances of the Middle Ages contain many allusions to forests famous in myth and enchanted forests full of magic. Several of them are connected with the quest for the Holy Grail and relate to the adventures of the gallant knights who figure in Arthurian romance as having undertaken that quest. The enchanted forest of Brocéliande in Brittany may be considered as a type of all that is best in romance, and the legends connected with it teem with the chivalry of bygone ages. It is forever associated with the name of Merlin, being reputed to contain his tomb, or rather the place of his enchantment, as legend tells that he was enchanted by Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, and entombed under a great stone. Merlin, wandering through the forest, came to a beautiful fountain and sat down on its brink to rest. To him came Vivian, whose mother, wife of the Lord of Brocéliande, and also a fae, had prophesied that the wisest man in the world should love her. He would grant all her desires, but could never compel her to consent to his. Merlin told her many of his magic secrets and promised to meet her in a year's time. He did so, and this time his love overpowered all his wisdom. She desired yet more wisdom, which he imparted. Finally, she desired to know an enchantment which would eternally bind him to her. He taught her, and so it came about that he was forever lost and withdrawn from the world of men. A ruined dolmen called the Perron de Belenton is supposed to represent the tomb of Merlin, and close beside it is the fountain of Belenton, or Barenton, where Merlin was said to have met the fae. Beside the fountain was a marvelous step or slab of stone, and an oak tree from which hung a golden basin overshadowed it. A medieval writer said of this spot, "O amazing wonder of the fountain of Brocéliande! If a drop be taken and poured on a certain rock beside the spring, immediately the water changes into vapor, forms itself into great clouds filled with hail. The air becomes thick with shadows and resonant with the muttering of thunder. Those who have come through curiosity to behold the prodigy wish that they had never done so. So filled are their hearts with terror, and so does fear paralyze their limbs. Incredible as the marvel may seem, yet the proofs of its reality are too abundant to be doubted." Huon de Marais claimed to have beheld all the marvels by taking water from the fountain and sprinkling the step. Robert de Wace, however, hearing of the wonders of this forest, went expectant into it, but did not appear to have seen or heard anything out of the ordinary. He wrote, "Thither I went in search of wonders. The forest I saw, the earth I saw. I sought wonders, but found none. Foolishly I returned, foolishly I went back. Foolishly I went, foolishly I returned thence. I sought foolishness, a fool I held myself." The Welsh romance of the Lady of the Fountain, found in the Mabinogion, evidently treats of the same theme. One of King Arthur's knights, called Cymon, set out one day in quest of adventures, he came to a great tree under which sprang a fountain by the side of which was a marble slab. On the slab lay a silver bowl. He had been instructed to empty this bowl full of water from the fountain on the slab. No sooner had he done so than a terrific storm of hail followed, which nearly made an end of him and stripped the tree bare of leaves. As soon as the hail ceased, numerous birds resting on the leafless tree poured forth a ravishing melody, and a black knight made his appearance who worsted him in combat, after which he returned home. This has been compared to the rain-making ceremonies found in the folklore of many races. Another enchanted fountain was situated in the forest of Arden, and was said to have been created by Merlin, in order that Sir Tristram might be cured of his passion for Isolde. That knight, however, never drank of it, yet its virtue remained. The scene of the French romance of Lancelot de Lac, or Lancelot of the Lake, is also placed in the forest of Brocéliande. Lancelot on the banks of a lake while she tended her husband on his deathbed. Hold on a second here. It relates how the queen of King Ban left her newborn son Lancelot on the banks of a lake while she tended her husband on his deathbed. When she returned, she found the child in the arms of a lovely lady who, heedless of her entreaties to return him, plunged with him into the lake and disappeared. This lake was an illusion, and the art of creating it had been taught by the devil to Merlin, who, as already narrated, had passed on his knowledge to the Fay Vivian, who also known as Dame de Lac. The lake concealed a forest in which the lady had many fair palaces, and in one of these Sir Lancelot was educated in all knightly matters, and in due time became one of the most famous knights of King Arthur's court. It is related that Alexander the Great and Floridas went to reside with Dame de Lac in her enchanted castle in the forest in order to be cured of their wounds, and that the fortnight they spent with her seemed to be but one night. Another of King Arthur's knights was Sir Launfal, who, it is said, was displeased with the king when he married the lovely but frail Guinevere. She ignored him when she was distributing gifts, whereupon Sir Launfal left the court and after a time happened to ride into a fair forest. Here, being overcome by the heat, he lay down under the shade of a tree and fell into a reverie, from which he was aroused by the approach of two charming maidens sumptuously attired. They invited him to meet their mistress, the beautiful Dame Triamore. He did so, and the lady, falling in love with him, gave him many valuable gifts of magical powers. Afterwards he returned to the court of King Arthur, but again at the misfortune to offend the queen. He was timely rescued from her vengeance by Dame Triamore, with whom he departed, and the romance concludes. Thus Launfal, withouten fable, that noble knight of the Round Table, was taken into the fairy, since saw him in this land no man. Nay, no more of him tell I ne can, forsooth without lie. The enchanted forest of Brocéliande is the haunt of one of the most malignant of the beings with which popular fancy has peopled the woods. This is the Corrigan, who, under the guise of a fair and lovely maiden, may often be encountered beside the sylvan streams and fountains, but only at night, as she shuns the day. By her fatal wiles she has the power to enthrall the hearts of the noblest of men, who are doomed to perish for the love of her. Her powers of enchantment were unparalleled. By aid of her wand, the forest recesses in which she dwelt became changed into a sumptuous palace, containing all that would delight and charm the ear and eye. Here, throughout the night, her hapless victim was royally entertained, but the first rays of dawn dissolved the charm. The woods resumed their wonted aspect, while the fair maiden was transformed into a hideous hag. The Breton romance of Sir Roland relates how, that night, rode unattended through the forest in haste, a league ahead of his troop, lest he be late for the crusade. He had taken a vow never to touch a lady's hand except with his mailed glove, nor ever to press a maiden's lips. Darkness overtook him on the way, and seeing a brilliantly illuminated castle, he entered it. A lady of dazzling beauty accosted him and entertained him sumptuously during the livelong night. He had almost succumbed to her wiles, but while in the act of bending to salute her lips, she shrank from him. He had seen the earliest flush of dawn appearing in the east, and with that the whole scene became transformed. The castle walls melted into tree trunks, the couches became grassy banks, and the rugs and carpets were revealed as mossy forest paths. Looking down on the lady, a fearful countenance of baffled hate and rage met Roland's gaze, and with a hideous shriek the Corrigan fled into the forest depths. Roland fell on his knees, and clasping his rosary, returned thanks for his great deliverance. Thus was he found when his troop rose merrily into the glade. Another enchanted forest is mentioned in one of the folk tales of Brittany, called the Castle of the Sun. There was once a peasant who had a family of 6 sons and 1 daughter. The youngest son, Ivan, and the daughter, Ivan, being delicate and gentle, were treated as drudges. One day, when Ivan was taking the cattle to pasture, she met a handsome stranger who married her and took her away. After a year, the brothers desired to see their sister and set off in search of her, leaving Ivan behind. Riding on, they came to a wide spreading forest in which they lost themselves. They found an old woman tending a large fire, who said that her son, a giant, could direct them to her sister. The giant led them to a great plain where he deserted them. They were bewildered, but after many wanderings and adventures, they at last succeeded in returning home. Ivan then set out to find his sister. He had similar experiences, but being bold and resolute, he at last came to a palace of crystal in the forest where his sister lived. She told him she was happy, except that her husband was absent every day, going she knew not whither. When the latter returned that evening, he and Ivan became very friendly, and Ivan asked if he might accompany him on his journey next day. He agreed, but on the condition that if you touch or address anyone save me, you must return home. They then set off, and Ivan saw many strange sights. But that which seemed strangest of all to him was the sight of 2 trees lashing each other angrily with their branches, as though each would beat the other to the ground. Laying his hands on them, he forbade them to fight, and lo, in a moment they became 2 human beings, a man and wife, who thanked Ivan for releasing them from an enchantment under which they had been laid as a punishment for their perpetual bickering. Ivan, by thus disenchanting the trees, had failed to observe the one condition, and had to return to his sister's palace. Then he was sent home, and on reaching his native village found his dwelling gone. On asking for his father, an old man replied, "I have heard of him. He lived in the days when my grandfather's grandfather was but a boy, and now he sleeps in the churchyard yonder." Ivan then realized that his visit to his sister had been one of generations. The Arthurian romances mention another mystical forest called Inglewood. Mr. Thomas Keightley gives the following tradition of Perigord. Embosomed in the forest of the canton of La Double, near the road leading from Périgueux to Ribérac, is a monument named Roque Brune. It consists of 4 enormous rocks placed 2 and 2, so as to form an alley 10 feet long and 6 wide. A 5th rock, higher and thicker than the others, closes this space on the west. The whole is covered by a huge mass of rock at least 12 feet by 7, and from 3 to 4 feet thick. There can be no doubt of its being the work of man, and it is remarkable that the stone composing it is different from that of the soil on which it stands. The tradition of the canton, however, is that many thousand years ago there was a fée, who was the sovereign of the whole country, and having lost her husband in this very place, she resolved to bury him on the spot. She therefore called 6 of her pages and ordered them to fetch each one of these stones, and to place them in the order which they still remain. They instantly obeyed, and they carried and arranged the huge masses as easily as if they had been only rose leaves. When the tomb was completed, the fairy ascended it, and turning to the east, she thrice cursed, in a voice of thunder, whoever would henceforth dare even to touch this monument of her royal spouse. Many an instant is still recorded by the peasantry of those who dared and were punished. The forest of Colombiers in Poitou is associated with the myth of Melusina. Mr. Keightley, in narrating the legend, tells how Melusina was the daughter of Elenice, king of Albania, and the beautiful fay Priscina. Melusina, having offended her mother, was condemned by her to become a serpent from the waist down every Saturday until she met a man who should love her so much that he would consent to marry her under the promise of never seeing her on a Saturday. She then wandered through the forest in search of this man until she came to the forest of Columbiers. Here all the fays of the district met her and told her they had been waiting for her to reign over them. Count Raymond, while wandering in the forest, met her in the moonlight and, attracted by her beauty, married her, having first taken the requisite oath never to endeavour to see her on a Saturday. Unfortunately, he violated his oath, whereupon Melusina told him that, obedient to the decree of destiny, she would have to leave him and flit about the earth as a spectre in pain and suffering until the day of doom. She would only become visible when one of his race was about to die at Lusignan, her parting words being, "But one thing I will say to thee before I part, that thou, and those who for more than 100 years shall succeed thee, shall know that whenever I am seen to hover over the fair castle of Lusignan, then will it be certain that in that very year the castle will get a new lord, and though people may not perceive me in the air, yet they will see me by the fountain of thirst. And this shall be so long as the castle stands in honour and flourishing, especially on the Friday before the lord of the castle shall die." Having thus spoken, she vanished with loud wailing and lamentation, and ever since she has only been seen as a spectre of the night. Many tales are told of the various appearances she has made, frequently in the form of a serpent with markings of blue and white. In the forest of Longbowl in Normandy, when the wind blows melodiously through the trees, the peasants imagine they hear the voices of the ancient verderers, the guardians of the forest, the spirits of whom return to their old familiar haunts, and the forest of Fontainebleau, Le Grand Veneer, is still supposed to hunt and may be heard on stormy nights. A very charming French romance is that of Juan de Bordeaux. Juan, during his travels, met one Gerasmes in Syria and inquired of him the way to Babylon. He was told that there were two roads, one long and safe, the other which led through a forest short but dangerous, as it was so full of fairy mysteries that few people could traverse it. Oberon, king of the fairies, dwelt in it. He was 3 feet in height, with an angelic face, and was wont to meet any wayfarer through the forest and endeavour to persuade him to speak to him. If he succeeded in getting one to speak to him, that hapless wight was lost for evermore. Should, however, the traveller's resolve of silence hold good, Oberon, in the words of the romance, will be passing wrath with you. For before you have left the wood, he will cause it so to rain, to blow, to hail, and to make such right marvellous storms, thunder and lightning, that you will think the world is going to end. Then you will think that you see a great flowing river before you, wondrously black and deep. But no, sire, that right easily you will be able to go through it without wetting the feet of your horse, for it is nothing but a phantom and enchantments that the dwarf will make for you, because he wishes to have you with him, and if so be that you keep firm in your resolve not to speak to him, you will be surely able to escape. Juan followed for some time the advice given, but after experiencing the storms, he resolved to wait for and speak to Oberon. Shortly afterwards, he met the dwarf, who informed him that he was the son of Julius Caesar, and that at his birth all the fairies had been invited save one. This was, in revenge for the slight, decreed that he would not grow after his 3rd year, but afterwards repenting, and to make what amends she could, she bestowed upon him the most comely countenance. The romance concludes by Oberon going to Bordeaux and helping to reconcile Juan to King Charlemagne. The Orlando Furioso of Ariosto tells how Count Orlando, on seeing the fair Angelica, immediately fell in love with her, although he was already married. Angelica, meantime, had lost her heart to the young Medoro, and while strolling with him in the forest, he carved their names upon a tree growing beside a fountain. Orlando, hearing how Angelica despised his love, betook himself with his grief into the depths of the forest, where he gave vent to his anguish in shrieks and groans. All night about the forest roved the Count, and at the break of daily light was brought by his unhappy fortune to the fount, where his inscription young Medoro wrought. To see his wrongs inscribed upon that mount inflamed his fury so, in him was not, but turned to hatred, frenzy, rage, and spite. Drawing his sword, he destroyed the carving, and, so fierce his rage, so fierce his fury grew. that discarding his weapon, he tore down with his hands many of the forest giants, pines, oaks, and others. In his frenzy, he became a terror in the forests and ravaged them throughout the land of France. The romance of the twin brothers Valentine and Orson tells how they were born in a wood near Orleans, and that Orson was carried off by a bear which suckled him. Owing to this upbringing, he became the terror of France when he grew to manhood and was called the wild man of the forest. Tasso, in his great poem Jerusalem Delivered, relates how the forest was enchanted by Ismeno, the sorcerer. He peopled it with demons who had instructions to guard the trees from Christians. Godfrey, the leader of the Christian host, desirous of obtaining timber for use in his siege, at first sent workmen to fell the trees, and on their failing to do so, sent his soldiers, but all returned in a state of terror. Alcestis then, in a boastful spirit, set out for the enchanted forest, vowing that no terrors would daunt him. His boast was premature, and being utterly overcome by the strange weird sights he beheld, he was fain to return humiliated and abject in spirit. Some others that attempted the task, but in vain. Tancred almost succeeded, but even he failed in the end. At last he told in book XVIII, Rinaldo proceeded alone to the enchanted forest, resisted the temptations, and thus broke the spell. The Christians were then enabled to hew the trees and form their siege weapons. The forest of Champagne will ever be memorable as the site of the signing of armistice between Germany and France and her allies on November 11th, 1918, which marked the close of the Great War. In the midst of the forest, a clearing had been made, one stone slab placed, showing where Marshal Foch's train drew up, and another showing where that of the German delegates came to a standstill. Between them, in the center of the clearing, is another large slab, bearing an inscription indicating that on this spot an end was made of German ambition to bring the free peoples of Europe under German subjection. Gervase of Tilbury, writing in the 13th century, as quoted by Mr. Keightley, mentions a forest which had some supernatural abilities. He says, there is, Otia imperalia, apud limnitz scriptors rerum Brunsvicarum, in the county of Gloucester, a forest abounding in boars, stags, and every species of game that England produces. In a grovy lawn of this forest there is a little mount rising in a point to the height of a man, on which knights and other hunters are used to ascend when fatigued with heat and thirst, to seek some relief for their wants. The nature of the place and of the business is, however, such that whoever ascends the mount must leave his companions and go quite alone. When alone, he was to say, as if speaking to some other person, I thirst, and immediately there would appear a cup-bearer in an elegant dress, with a cheerful countenance, bearing in his stretched-out hand a large horn, adorned with gold and gems, as was the custom among the most ancient English. In the cup, nectar of an unknown but most delicious flavor was presented, and when it was drunk, all the heat and weariness fled from the glowing body, so that one would be thought ready to undertake toil instead of having toiled. Moreover, when the nectar was taken, the servant presented a towel to the drinker to wipe his mouth with, and then, having performed his office, he waited neither for a recompense for his services, nor for questions and inquiry. This frequent and daily action had for a long period of old times taken place among the ancient people, till one day a knight of that city, when out hunting, went thither, and having called for a drink and gotten the horn, did not, as was the custom, and as is good manners he should have done, return it to the cupbearer, but kept it for his own use. But the illustrious Earl of Gloucester, when he learned the truth of the matter, condemned the robber to death, and presented the horn to the most excellent King Henry the Elder, lest he should be thought to have approved of such wickedness, if he had added the rapine of another to the store of his private property. This tale clearly appears to be a version of the Grail legend. Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire will ever be famous as the scene of the exploits of bold Robin Hood and his merry men. and the tinkling, wild-blown bell which guided the Black Knight to the cell of the clerk of Copmanhurst. The forest of Ben Bulben was famous in Irish romance as the arena wherein a boar perpetrated many atrocities. This boar happened to be the transformed stepbrother of Dermot, and the legend relates how it roamed the forest until one day, chancing to meet Dermot, and it slew him. There is a tradition that when Napoleon, riding during his Russian campaign, had, after leading his army 3 times running against the monastery of the Holy Trinity near Moscow, arrived at the gates of Troitsa, a thick forest suddenly sprang up before him. He vainly endeavored to penetrate the forest, was constantly misled, and after having been practically lost in it for 3 days, succeeded, after great difficulty, in regaining the road back to Moscow. Similar narratives are found in the fairy tales of other countries. Thus, there is a popular English tale which runs, "At break of day, when the giant's daughter was fleeing with the prince, the giant in pursuit, she exclaimed that she felt her father's breath on her back, he being so close at hand. She said to the prince, 'Put your hand quickly into the ear of the grey filly and throw behind you what you will find there.' 'It is the point of a thorn,' he said. 'Throw it behind you,' she reiterated. He did so, and a forest of blackthorns 20 miles long immediately sprang up. So dense was it that a weasel could scarcely slip through. When the giant came to it, he lacerated his head and neck so severely that he had to give up the pursuit." Again, we are told how the wandering princess, aided by a magic wand, opened a path through an impenetrable hedge and continued her journey. The evil being following her thought to pass through it in his turn, but the hedge closed in on him and lacerated him. In Perrault's tale of the Sleeping Beauty in the wood, it is narrated that scarcely had the prince advanced towards the wood when all the great trees, the briars, and the thorns moved aside of themselves to let him pass. He went on towards the castle at the end of a grand avenue, into which he had entered, and what greatly surprised him was that no one could follow him because the trees had closed in again as soon as he had passed. And that is the end of part 2. I hope you truly enjoyed that. What better place to read forest folklore than in the forest?